Technical Manifesto of Futurist Literature by F.T. Marinetti, May 11, 1912. Sitting astride the fuel tank of an airplane, my stomach warmed by the aviator's head, I felt the ridiculous inanity of the old syntax inherited from Homer, a raging need to liberate words, dragging them out from the prison of the Latin period. Like all imbeciles, this period naturally has a prudent head, a stomach, two legs, and two flat feet. But it will never have two wings, just enough to walk, take a short run, and come up short, panting. This is what the swirling propeller told me as I sped along at 200 meters above the powerful smokestacks of Milan. 1. It is imperative to destroy syntax and scatter one's nouns at random, just as they are born. 2. It is imperative to use verbs in the infinitive, so that the verb can be elastically adapted to the noun and not be subordinated to the eye of the writer who observes or imagines. Only the infinitive can give a sense of the continuity of life and the elasticity of the intuition that perceives it. 3. Adjectives must be abolished, so that the noun retains its essential color. The adjective, which by its nature tends to render shadings, is inconceivable within our dynamic vision, for it presupposes a pause, a meditation. 4. Adverbs must be abolished. Old buckles strapping together two words. Adverbs give a sentence, a tedious unity of tone. 5. Every noun must have its double, which is to say, every noun must be immediately followed by another noun, with no conjunction between them, to which it is related by analogy. Example, man, torpedo boat, woman, bay, crowd, surf, piazza, funnel, door, faucet. Just as aerial speed has multiplied our experience of the world, perception by analogy is becoming more natural for man. It is imperative to suppress words such as like, as, so, and similar to. Better yet, to merge the object directly into the image which it evokes, foreshortening the image to a single essential word. 6. Abolish all punctuation. With adjectives, adverbs, and conjunctions having been suppressed, naturally punctuation is also annihilated within the variable continuity of a living style that creates itself, without the absurd pauses of commas and periods. To accentuate certain movements and indicate their directions, mathematical signs will be used, plus, minus, times, along with musical notations. 7. Until now, writers have been restricted to immediate analogies. For example, they have compared an animal to man or to another animal, which is more or less the same thing as taking a photograph. They compared, for example, a fox terrier to a tiny thoroughbred. A more advanced writer might compare that same trembling terrier to a telegraph. I instead compare it to gurgling water. In this, there is an ever greater gradation of analogies, affinities ever deeper and more solid, however remote. Analogy is nothing other than the deep love that binds together things that are remote, seemingly diverse or inimical. The life of matter can be embraced only by an orchestral style, at once polychromatic, polyphonic, and polymorphous, by means of the most extensive analogies. In my Battle of Tripoli, when I have compared a trench bristling with bayonets to an orchestra, or a machine gun to a femme fatale, I have intuitively introduced a large part of the universe into a brief episode of African combat. Images are not flowers to be chosen and gathered with parsimony, as Voltaire said. They constitute the very lifeblood of poetry. Poetry should be an uninterrupted flow of new images, without which it is merely anemia and green sickness. The vaster their affinities, the more images will retain their powers to astound. One must, people say, spare the reader an excess of the marvelous. Bah! We should worry instead about the fatal corrosion of time, which destroys not just the expressive value of a masterpiece, but its power to astound. Too often, stimulated to enthusiasm, haven't our old ears perhaps already destroyed Beethoven and Wagner? It is imperative, then, to abolish whatever in language has become a stereotyped image, a faded metaphor, and that means nearly everything. 8. There are no categories of images, noble or gross or popular, eccentric or natural. The intuition that perceives them has no preference or parties pris. Therefore, the analogical style is the absolute master of all matter and its intensive life. 9. To render the successive movements of an object, it is imperative to render the chain of analogies which it evokes, each condensed and concentrated into one essential word. Here is an expressive example of a chain of analogies, though still masked and weighed down beneath traditional syntax. Ah, yes, little machine gun, you are a fascinating woman, and sinister and divine, at the steering wheel of an invisible 100-horsepower engine that roars with explosive impatience. Oh, surely you will soon leap into the circuit of death to a shattering somersault or victory. Do you wish me to compose madrigals full of grace and vivacity? At your pleasure, my dear. For me, you resemble a lawyer before the bar, whose tireless, eloquent tongue strikes to the heart of the surrounding listeners, who are deeply moved. You at this moment are like an omnipotent trephine that is boring deeply into the hard skull of the refractory knight. And you are a rolling mill, an electric laugh. And what else? A great blowtorch that burns, chisels, and slowly melts the metallic tips of the final stars from Battle of Tripoli. In some cases, it will be imperative to join images 2 by 2, like those chained iron balls which can level a stand of trees in their flight, to catch and gather whatever is most evanescent and ineffable in matter. It is imperative to shape strict nets of images or analogies, which will then be cast into the mysterious sea of phenomena. Except for the traditional festoons of its form, the following passage from my Mafarka the Futurist is an example of such a dense net of images. All the bitter sweetness of bygone youth rose in his throat as the cheerful shouts of children in the playground rise up to their old teachers, while they lean out over the seaside balconies, watching boats skim across the sea. And here are 3 more nets of images. Around the well of Bumliana, beneath the thick olive trees, 3 camels squatting comfortably in the sand gurgled with contentment, like rainpipes, mixing the chack-chack of their spitting with the steady thud of the steam pump that supplies water to the city, shrieks and futurist dissonances. In the deep orchestra of the trenches with their sensuous orifices and resonant cellars, amid the coming and going of bayonets, violin bows which the violet baton of twilight has inflamed with enthusiasm. The orchestra conductor, Sunset, with a sweeping gesture, gathers in the scattered flutes of the birds in the trees, and the grieving harps of the insects, and the sound of crushed stones. Suddenly he stops the tympanums of the mess kits and crashing rifles, so as to let the muted instruments sing out over the orchestra, all the golden stars erect, arms akimbo, on the grand stage of the sky. And here comes the diva of the performance, a neckline plunging to her breasts. The desert displays her immense bosom in curvaceous liquefaction, aglow with rouge beneath the cascading jewels of the monstrous night, Battle of Tripoli. 10. As every kind of order is inevitably a product of the cautious and circumspect mind, it is imperative to orchestrate images, distributing them with the maximum of disorder. 11. Destroy the I in literature, that is, all psychology. The sort of man who has been damaged by libraries and museums, subjected to a logic and wisdom of fear, is absolutely of no interest anymore. We must abolish him in literature and replace him once and for all with matter, whose essence must be seized by strokes of intuition, something which physicists and chemists can never achieve. Capture the breath, the sensibility, and the instincts of metals, stones, woods, and so on. Through the medium of free objects and capricious motors, substitute for human psychology now exhausted the lyrical obsession with matter. Be careful not to assign human sentiments to matter, but instead to divine its different governing impulses, its forces of compression, dilation, cohesion, disintegration, its heaps of molecules massed together, or the electrons whirling like turbines. There is no point in creating a drama of matter that has been humanized. It is the solidity of a steel plate which interests us as something in itself, with its incomprehensible and inhuman cohesion of molecules or electrons, which can resist penetration by a howitzer. The heat of a piece of iron or wood leaves us more impassioned than the smile of tears of a woman. We want literature to render the life of a motor, a new instinctive animal whose guiding principle we will recognize when we have come to know the instincts of the various forces that compose it. Nothing for a futurist poet is more interesting than the action of mechanical piano keyboards. Film offers us the dance of an object that disintegrates and recomposes itself without human intervention. It offers us the backward sweep of a diver whose feet fly out of the sea and bounce violently back on the springboard. Finally, it offers us the sight of a man driving at 200 kilometers per hour. All these represent the movement of matter which are beyond the laws of human intelligence, and hence of an essence which is more significant. Three elements which literature has hitherto overlooked must now become prominent in it. 1. Noise, a manifestation of the dynamism of objects. 2. Weight, the capacity for flight in objects. 3. Smell, the capacity of objects to disperse themselves. Take pains, for example, to render the landscape of odors that a dog perceives. Listen to engines and reproduce their speech. Matter has always been contemplated by an eye who was distanced, cold, too preoccupied with himself, full of pretensions to wisdom and human obsessions. Man tends to befoul matter with his youthful joy or aging sorrow, matter which possesses an admirable continuity of momentum toward greater heat, greater movement, greater subdivision of itself. Matter is neither sad nor happy. Its essence is boldness, will, and absolute force. It wholly belongs to the divining poet, who will know how to free himself of syntax, which is traditional, burdensome, restrictive, and confined to the ground, armless and wingless because it is merely intelligent. Only the asynactical poet with words set free will be able to penetrate the essence of matter and destroy the mute hostility that separates it from us. The Latin period, which has been used until now, has been a pretentious gesture with which an overwhelming and myopic mind has tried to tame the multiform and mysterious life of matter. The Latin period has been stillborn. Profound intuitions of life linked together one by one, word by word, according to their illogical surge. These will give us the general outlines of an intuitive psychology of matter. That is what was revealed to me from the heights of the airplane. Looking at objects from a new vantage point, no longer head on or from behind, but straight down, foreshortened. It was able to break apart the old shackles of logic and the plumb lines of the old forms of comprehension. All of you futurist poets who have loved and followed me until now have been frenzied builders of images and bold explorers of analogies, just as I have. But the narrow nets of metaphor are unfortunately too weighed down by the plumb lines of logic. I urge you to make them lighter, so that your immensified gesture can hurl them farther, cast them out over a vaster expanse of ocean. Together, we will discover what I call the wireless imagination. One day, we will achieve an art that is still more essential, the day when we dare to suppress all the first terms of our analogies, in order to render nothing other than an uninterrupted sequence of second terms. To achieve this, it will be necessary to forego being understood. It isn't necessary to be understood. We have already dispensed with the privilege anyways, even when we have written fragments of a futurist sensibility by means of traditional and intellective syntax. Syntax has been a kind of abstract cipher, which poets have used in order to inform the masses about the color, the musicality, the plasticity, and architecture of the universe. It has been a sort of interpreter, a monotonous tour guide. We must suppress this intermediary so that literature can directly enter into the universe and become one body with it. My work sharply differs from anyone else by virtue of its frightening power of analogy. Its inexhaustible wealth of image rivals the disorder of its illogical punctuation. And at the head of all this is the first Futurist Manifesto, the synthesis of a 100-horsepower engine racing at the most insane velocities over land. Why should we still make use of our 4 exasperated wheels that are boring, when we can break free of the ground and once and for all the liberation of words, unfolding wings of the imagination, the analogical synthesis of the earth embraced in a single view and gathered together whole in essential words. They scream at us, your literature will not be beautiful, will no longer have a verbal symphony that is composed of harmonious rhythms and tranquilizing cadences. We understand that quite well, and how lucky. We instead make use of all the ugly sounds, the expressive screams of the violent life that surrounds us. Let us boldly make the ugly in literature, and let us everywhere murder solemnity. Go on, I don't assume those grand priestly airs when listening to me. Every day we must spit on the altar of art. We are entering the boundless domains of free intuition. After free verse, here at last are words and freedom. There are no elements in this, either the absolute or the systematic. Genius has impetuous spurts and muddy torrents. Sometimes it requires analytical and explanatory languors. Nobody can renovate his own sensibility all at once. Dead cells are mixed together with live ones. Art is a need to destroy and disperse oneself, a great watering can of heroism that drowned the world. And don't forget, microbes are necessary for the health of the stomach and the intestines. Just so there is also a species of microbes that are necessary for the health of art. Art which is a prolongation of the forest of our arteries, prolongation which flows beyond the body and extends into the infinity of space and time. Futurist poets, I have taught you to hate libraries and museums in order to prepare you for the next leap, to hate intelligence, reawakening in you divine intuition, the characteristic gift of the Latin races. By means of intuition, we shall overcome the seemingly irreducible divide that separates our human flesh from the metal of motors. After the reign of the animal, behold the beginnings of the reign of machine. Through growing familiarity and friendship with matter, which scientists can know only in its physical and chemical reactions, we are preparing the creation of the mechanical man with interchangeable parts. We will liberate man from the idea of death, and hence from death itself, the supreme definition of the logical mind.